In this video, I give an overview of the LIFE methodology. The LIFE methodology has 4 phases, just like the acronym: listen, innovate, field test, evaluate. Listen stands for performing a needs study. Innovation is done by agile co-creation. We field test through an agile pre-experiment and perform a final evaluation. When we go from one phase to another, we have to make sure that we're ready for that. That's why this methodology also has 5 checkpoints. The first checkpoint is at the beginning of your project, the project scoping. Then a capability scoping before entering agile co-creation. A stability check before entering agile pre-experiment, and a maturity check before entering the final evaluation. At the end of your project, you have to do a market readiness check. Each of these 4 phases have several activities and experiments and sub-research topics. We'll go through them one by one. In the listen, we start with scoping the project. That's the first checkpoint. We have to make sure that the structuring elements of the project are aligned. And with that we mean the timelines, financial and human resources and constraints, the decision which robot development platform to use, the objectives of the project, of course, and the use cases covered by the project. Once we know that, we can actually start with our needs study. We do that to identify the priority needs and robust capabilities through in-depth interviews with older adults, formal and informal caregivers. The actual mixture of adults, formal, informal caregivers depends on the use case. We can only close this needs study phase if we do a capability scoping. That is refinement of the technical objectives of the project. We have to think very critically what is technically available and feasible, and maybe evenly important, what is unachievable and unchangeable. This is important to make sure that we manage expectations throughout the rest of the project well. Second, the innovate. This is the agile co-creation process. We develop the robotic solutions in close collaboration with end users. The same older adults, informal and informal caregivers that are part of your project and are relevant for your use case. What makes this phase agile is the use of agile methodology, agile tools. In practice, that means that we organize co-design sessions with multidisciplinary co-creation team. We perform small tests with 2 to 4 users in real-life situations. We apply agile methodology to develop and refine the robot, and have a quality check meeting before entering a new design cycle, and perform an acceptance test. So is the robot technically ready to be tested and to be improved in a next cycle of co-design? At the end of this phase, we have to do a stability check. Is the robot technically ready for an experiment in a real-life situation? If every time a technician is needed because the robot gets stuck or the application has still some bugs, then it is not ready for the next phase of the project, and that means that you still stay in the phase of agile co-creation and still have to make improvements. The field test, the third phase. This is where we perform an agile pre-experiment. We call it a pre-experiment because in the 4th phase of the project you have a large end experiment. It is agile in the sense that during this experiment it is still possible to make optimizations to the robots and the robot services based on the input gathered during the experiment. What we do in the Agile pre-experiment is to test robotic solutions in a real context by a larger group of end users than in the co-creation phase. In addition to that, we gather as much data as possible to further develop the artificial intelligence of the robot. So as we learn from the experiment, we can further mature the robot and optimize it. At the end of this phase, a maturity check is important to check if the robot is really ready for a large experiment in a real-life setting. If that is not the case, if the results of the pre-experiment shows that improvements and optimizations are needed, it depends on the type of improvements and optimizations if you can either stay in the field test or go back to INNOVATE, because apparently some other features or services have to be redeveloped and really be tested again. That could be the case. Then the final phase, evaluate. This consists of 3 different research activities. The end experiment, where we do a thorough assessment of the value of the robotic solutions under real-life conditions in an end experiment, which preferably also has a control group, because we're interested here in the impact of the robotic solution on well-being, loneliness, quality of life, or a clinical parameter, whatever the outcome is you're interested in. And you might even be interested in the cost effectiveness of the solution. The second research activity is a market assessment, where you can investigate the potential market through a market survey. For example, if the robot is going to be a consumer product, it is relevant to do this survey with a sample of older adults in Europe or in your own country. Then the third research activity makes use of the results of the end experiment and the market assessment. It is a sustainability assessment. So what is needed for sustainable entry to the market and for implementation in either the homes of older adults or in care organizations? This assessment is done on multiple domains. For this, you also need expertise from different disciplines. It contains a technical assessment, user perception of the services and acceptance of the robot, outcomes such as impact on well-being, quality of life, economic aspects that can be the business model, the cost effectiveness, organizational aspects that have to do with the implementation in practice, and sociocultural, ethical and legal aspects that also might be important for entering the market in a good way. You can think of certificates that are needed for using it as a medical device, or privacy assessments. So the market readiness check that you do after this phase is to assess if the robot is really ready on all these domains to enter the market, and if not, what work is still needed and who should do this work. Is it the research team? Is it the vendor of the robot? Is it a health insurer or some other partner? Those are important questions before the robot is ready to enter the market. The LIFE methodology is explained more in depth in our methodology handbook, which you can download from our website. The LIFE methodology is the result of the ACRA project, a European-Japanese collaborative project on robotic solutions for older adults. It has been funded by Horizon 2020 and NICT.